my most amazing scholars of truth, goodness, and beauty. How are you today? My 2G scholars, we have been learning about the castles, the medieval times, the stained glass windows, the cathedrals, all sorts of interesting facts about how life was different in the Middle Ages. And today we are going to start focusing on a famous artist named Bruegel. And this gentleman painted paintings about 500 years ago. The one we're going to focus on today is called The Peasant Wedding. I'm going to show that to you in just a second. But I just want you to start thinking about what life would be like as just a regular person living back in the times that were before the modern era. And we're going to take a look at some of these scenes from peasant life from way back in the Middle Ages. All right, let's take a look. Here's the painting I want to show you today. This painting has a lot going on. And before I tell you anything else about it, I just want you to take a close look at it and see if you can figure out what's going on in this painting. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see some things close up. We've got some food on a table, but it's not really a table, it's a makeshift table. Do you see the hinges there? They're using a door placed on a couple of poles as a table. That might give you a clue that these are not the wealthy people in the society. All right, I'm going to zoom in over here so you can see some of the faces. This lady looks important. She has something around her head. She's sitting in a spot that is backed by a beautiful color green, and there's something decorative hanging above her head. She might be the guest of honor. Let's see, what else do we have going on here? I see in the corner, a lucky little child has found some things to eat. And we've got someone here who is serving a beverage. And there's some people here. What are they doing? Looks like they have a musical instrument, perhaps. Something looks kind of like the bagpipes from Scotland, but a little different. And we've got a whole crowd of people in the doorway. Women, children, men. Looks like they're feasting. Well, that is a clue. This picture is called The Peasant Wedding. Do you see now a little bit about how these people look like, instead of being royalty or wealthy, they might be the average ordinary people in that day and age? The peasants. They work hard, they play hard, they're celebrating a wedding. But it's interesting because we don't see the groom, we only see the bride. Well, that is a Dutch tradition. Back in those days, the Dutch bride would be at the wedding feast by herself with her friends and family, and then later on in the evening, the new husband would join them. What else do I need to tell you? Look at some of the facial expressions here. It makes me wonder what they're talking about. Like, this lady looks a little bit concerned, and the bride looks like she's just kind of ignoring her, like she's just happy. She's concerned about something. Who knows what advice she's giving her, maybe. Let's see, these two seem to be having an interesting conversation. Look at his wide open eyes. I wonder if he is telling him some gossip or some bit of a tale that is surprising or scary. This man right here looks like he's asking for more. Like, hey, can I have a refill? All right, and then let's see, one more set of people over here. Looks like these two are having a conversation, maybe about the food or the wine or whatever they're drinking. Oh, look at this guy in the corner here. He is wondering, will I ever get in? It's so crowded. The chances don't look very good. Okay, well, it's so fun to look at a painting close up and see all those details. Peter Bruegel was very, very good at putting lots of detail in his paintings. The focal point here is right in this area. Sometimes I think when I look at this painting, I go right to the biggest character, one of the servers here who is bringing this plate, all these plates out. But he's not even looking at you, so he kind of like he brings my eye there, but then I go right back here to this green cloth and this lady underneath here, the bride. And I think it's really interesting that Peter Bruegel was able to do both of those things as a focal point, the large figure here and the bride in the background.
Well, that's exactly what we get to see thanks to Bruegel, who was known as the peasant painter. We're seeing a peasant wedding from the late 16th century.
There's so much to look at here. There are so many people crowded into this barn-like space. You can see huge walls of hay that are being stored in the background. And in front of that, a long table with, well, the wedding party.
This is a new type of painting. This is a genre painting, a scene of everyday life. And this is a subject that begins to be painted in the 16th century because the Protestant Reformation has happened.
This is a culture that was based on trade and manufacturing. It would have been those that had made a significant amount of money that would have then gone to artists and said, paint me a painting about our world.
So there was something really appealing about a monumental painting of peasants celebrating life, enjoying each other's company, and celebrating a wedding.
You used the word monumental a moment ago, and that's such a perfect word for this painting. Bruegel paints in a style that feels monumental. The figures are solid. They seem like the salt of the earth. Everything about this painting has a feeling of warm roughness.
It's important to think about that in relationship to the culture of Antwerp and Brussels, where Bruegel worked. Those were big cities that, as you said, were really wealthy. But what Bruegel is showing us here, and what his patrons wanted to see, was a much simpler life.
Let's do exactly what the artist is inviting us to do. Let's walk in.
There's a lot of feasting and drinking, a lot of drinking especially. We see the figure on the lower left who's pouring out the drink that's being enjoyed.
My guess is that's beer. This is Flanders, what is now Belgium, and they make great beer. And it makes sense because that's a drink made from grain, the very material that is so much a part of the life of these peasants. They're growing it, they're harvesting it, and here they're participating in a wedding on the thrashing floor. My eye first goes to that tray that's being carried by those two waiters when they seem to be bringing in some sort of porridge or pudding in these earthenware bowls. If you look a little bit past that, you can see a man in a red cap who's picking up those bowls and seems to be passing them down the table.
Carelessly, because one looks like the food is about to slip out of the bowl.
True. We might look under his hand and see that there's a knife, there's a cutting board, there's a loaf of bread, and then we might go to the right, and there we see, seated in a high-backed chair, the notary, the legal observer of the wedding. To his left, we can see a Franciscan speaking to a man who's elegantly dressed and really stands out. That would probably be the landowner, the noble whose land all of these peasants work.
And the artist is really drawing our attention to the star of the wedding, the star of any wedding, the bride, who forms the top of a pyramid between these two figures in the foreground that you were describing, and she sits in front of a green cloth. This was the tradition, below a crown, and also wearing a crown. And she sits very modestly and demurely, not partaking and eating and drinking, all part of the way peasants celebrated weddings in the 16th century.
Scholars have done research and determined that Bruegel is quite accurate in his representation. He's trying to get right how these rituals were enacted. And so the idea that the bride would stay very passive with her hands folded, not eating, not speaking, under that crown made of paper.
Not jewels.
Definitely not jewels, is apparently quite accurate. And so it is this glimpse, not only for us now in a later era, but even for the city patrons.
And when we think about that kind of anthropologist view, maybe sometimes we think about a view that's very distant. But I don't feel that with Bruegel. I feel a sense of sympathy with these figures, a sense of shared humanity. And I think that's what makes him a great painter, is that we look at the faces, and they feel like people we might know or recognize.
I really love the lower left corner of the painting. This little boy whose face is almost completely obscured by his hat. Although he's been dressed up, he's got that wonderful peacock feather in his cap, and he's making sure that he doesn't miss any drop of that pudding.
And then that figure who pours the beer is very graceful in his movements.
Beautifully foreshortened rendering of the face. This is almost drawing as well as painting. All the way at the far end of the table, there's another lovely little vignette that shows a woman with a small child seated next to her who's happily eating, and she seems to be looking up, holding her stein, saying, "Would you fill this up for me?
Would you mind getting me something else to drink?" And there's also the figure who's playing the bagpipes, who's watching the food come in. It's just a really lovely glimpse into life in the 16th century, painted with a sense of warmth and generosity.
We can inhabit this world with them in just a wonderfully intimate way.